Hey guys, Detective Fail here, or Dia for short. Hope you're doing well. Back with another review, this time on Final Fantasy XVI. Let's get started.
I am Joshua's shield. I'm sworn to protect him. He takes too many risks. I only wish I could save him from himself.
Clive, Well, if you're not going to pray to Metia for your safe return, I shall just have to do it for you.
These lines are spoken in the very first hour and detail three crucial details: his duty as Joshua's shield, how much he cares for his brother, and how Jill prays for his safe return. It's simple, to the dot, and captures the player's attention immediately. Statements are said with conviction, will, and resolve, told during the halcyon days of their youth. But terrible storms gather nearby. For Clive, Jill, and Joshua, their fates will change forevermore. Final Fantasy is no stranger to taking risks, and each iteration boldly goes where the previous ones have not walked, and 16 is no different. We follow Clive Rosfield's journey as a young lad into something more. For better or worse, he and others are embroiled in a political drama within Valisthea, a large continent with 6 nations, all with their factions, agendas, and notorious individuals with nefarious goals. And Rosfield is the poor sod who has to survive, kill, and go past his limits. Make no mistake, out of all the Final Fantasy games I've ever had the pleasure of playing, 16 consumed my waking thoughts and remained a constant as I went through the daily motions, and as the days passed into weeks, I am astonished by how much there is to do, uncover, and learn. I have gone the distance to see as much as I possibly can within 2 playthroughs, and here I am, staring at my Google Docs page after an exhaustive duel, spending countless hours figuring out if it deserves to reach my top 5 for Final Fantasies, and it does. I don't say that statement lightly, since I love the series since starting with 13 and have enjoyed over 22 entries, so you could say I am very familiar. Now then, it is time to review the latest entry to one of Square Enix's long-running IPs. Combat is addicting. I couldn't get enough of it. Experimenting with new skills and outfitting my kit, or rushing to face numerous bosses that are both fair and hit the right spots, of tweaking the difficulty at your leisure from story or action focus. The former grants free rings at the start to aid you, the latter you don't acquire automatically, but you can freely switch difficulties at any time, so you won't miss out. Equip accessible rings to make combat easier for you. Auto dodge, auto combo, auto potion, and more are available. A nice way to make fights easier or harder depending on your preference. With the help of Kingdom Hearts developers and Platinum Games, and signing up Ryota Suzuki, a Capcom veteran and one who has worked on the Devil May Cry series, a triple alliance emerges between these forces, and at the helm is Creative Business Unit 3, joining to make an impressive quad squad. The titular and amazing Naoki Yoshida, nicknamed Yoshi P, is the producer, a man who has worked tirelessly to reform the original Final Fantasy XIV launch into one of the most successful MMORPGs today. So you could say these guys are in very safe hands. Unafraid of taking risks, each Final Fantasy entry strives to make combat innovative, but also familiar to entertain both veterans and sprouts, or newbies. Traditional turn-based gameplay has radically shifted since its foundation, shifting into real-time action, and as someone who favors the turn-based approach, I don't mind the change to real-time. I appreciate it. There is a fluid momentum persisting as you dodge, parry, and execute Icon's abilities. Goblins? Move over, Goblin Slayer. Dude will incinerate them to kingdom come. Phoenix shifting with relentless fury as if the wind has blessed him with deadly claws. I didn't find clunky movements wherever I treaded, making battles go smoothly. Transitions into these skirmishes are near instant, so don't be afraid of a lengthy wait. Quick and nimble is the key here, and I had no problem acquiring different abilities to experiment and juggle my enemies. Didn't find an issue with the experience. The gain was fair, both in leveling up and upgrading my skills. I was satisfied to a degree of wanting more, and the developers gave me that and extra. The soundtrack is subtle, but full of magic, composed by Masayoshi Soken, who has worked just as tirelessly as Yoshi P in composing Final Fantasy XIV melodies. 16's composition is distinct from the compositions of Nobuo Uematsu from Final Fantasy I to Final Fantasy X, Masashi Hamauzu, who composed the Final Fantasy XIII trilogy, and Yoko Shimomura for Final Fantasy XV, and other composers. More in line with Hitoshi Sakimoto's works of Final Fantasy Tactics and Vagrant Story fame. Subtle, in a good way. I think most, if not all tracks work in favor of providing a layer I don't find as bombastic, full of vocals, or orchestral, going more for the tranquil and peaceful. And in some cases filled with tension, creates a tightrope to induce fear and bravery. There is meaning and weight to these songs. Triumphant lyrics are largely missing in favor of the solemn and at times contemplative ambient sounds gracing our ears. Pleasant, soothing, and incredibly transformative. Didn't hear the same old repetitive track again and again, always something unfamiliar to hear and listen to when I travel new places around the block. I could say more, but for the life of me, I cannot describe it justice enough. Just know, when the epic tunes hit, they hit bloody hard. There is a payoff in going subtle here, and if Uematsu can hear this, I think he would clap in joy for Soken's work. Gratifying gameplay loop that is cyclical, interconnected, and works in tandem with the other systems in place. Get too tired with combat? That's fine. Take a breather with some side quests that are almost perfect. Hitting the near zenith of Witcher 3 side quest quality combined with consistently powerful world building I haven't seen since I last played through the Legend of Heroes IP. Specifically the Sky Trilogy, Crossbow Duology, and Cold Steel Tetralogy. There is so much depth I am left in wonder and awe to study more about the history of Valisthea and its denizens. More often than not, you will encounter chunks of lore to varying degrees. Religion and societal customs included, unexpected discoveries in interpersonal relationships with folks I didn't expect, helping people in need at the main hub to assist strangers out in the world, and these are not pointless to do since the rewards can range from increasing your potions limit to rewarding items, weapons, equipment, materials, and key items. So worth it both in the physical and knowledge aspects. Easily the strongest side quests are the ones related to the main character, his party members, and by extension those who are allied with him, granting a decent to lengthy quest chains to learn more. Bond further and even partner up. Worthwhile to do, and I encourage everyone to complete as many as they possibly can. Some of these connect with quests benefiting players, and heck, if you're bored you could even undertake a hunt mission, which are like bounties to defeat unique monsters out in the field. Fun to do and a worthwhile conflict awaits. Solid way, building up renown, earn supplementary rewards. It's gotten to the point I couldn't wait to finish the main story quest so I can complete new side quests and hunts popping up on my radar. And Clive, bless his soul, doesn't mind at all aiding those in need, especially to offer a guiding hand to bearers. People who are essentially slaves and can use magic. Common folk can't use magic innately, used by slave masters and nobility as a means of cheap labor. Bearers are human tools. Do you want your garden trimmed? Let the boys use wind magic to trim the bushes into a presentable state. No need to work yourself and use bladed shears. Need clothes to dry quickly rather than letting the sun do the work? Let the bearer use wind magic again to blow air on your wet clothes, becoming a human dryer. Oh, need consistent fire for your blacksmithing duties? Grab one of those filthy bearers and order them to use their magic to cast Fira. Heating the stones instead of using natural fire. I kid you not, these instances I saw plenty throughout the world and equally jaw-dropping tales inside. In some cases my emotional state stewed in conniptions. I was immensely saddened to see a mirror image of our world's history of slavery, and the developers have managed to capture these horrific moments in ways I was left reeling. I won't go into the exact details, but my heart bled for each one, and I quickly, without hesitation, became the shield for those unfortunate souls who were suffering without end. World building is quality across the board. I usually have problems with world building in other Japanese role-playing games. Some go too far, gorging the player on unnecessary details. Others have too little and need more of the former. It's been a long time since I was so engrossed in the lore and history, and 16 manages to do it in such a way I am left hungry for more. Complementing this is a handy codex in the form of active time lore, ATL for short, where you can see relevant information during any part of the story. Yes, this includes cutscenes, incredibly well thought out, and as a lore nut, the feature is very satisfying to use when I need a refresher on what this legend is supposed to be. Why do we keep calling places Storm and Twins? What are bearers? The plot, quests, and your companions will continually talk about these elements in rich detail. I could gush more, but I think you see the picture. Wish other JRPGs and non-RPGs learn from this. An evolving world is persistent here. Each time a major or minor event has been resolved, whether by side quest or main story, the state of NPCs is adjusted to reflect that, and the very essence of Valisthea, wherever you travel to, also shares the same evolution. Oh, a major event took place at Redacted. Time to head back and check for differences in the citizenry. This is just one example of how places may vary over time. Very reminiscent of my time with the Trails franchise, I eagerly look forward to returning to the main hub and conversing with my comrades on the latest gossip, new information about the state of the realm, or the odd tip here and there you may not see coming. I cherish these NPCs, and I would go so far as to call some my dear friends. They all play a big role in shaping not just the main character's story, but their tales and stories are interwoven with his, leaving me with an everlasting impression. The gentle giant Goots, Sharp Eyes Gav, the gentle but stern Tarja, the wise Harpocrates, and of course we can't forget the wise and venerable and slick leader we have. These individuals have their struggles and quests from which we witness, cooperate, and in doing so we are treated to a fantastic cast willing to shoulder our burdens, to care for our wounds, to sustain us with supplies, and support us through thick and thin. Against all odds, we stand together. There are, however, mixed feelings I have with this entry. Won't say names since this is a non-spoiler review and certainly not a positive or a negative, but for the sake of transparency, I'm noting them down here. One character in particular needed more fleshing out, some villains and to a lesser degree other persons. I felt I didn't grasp their entire being more than others, which is funny because I adore my party. Sadly, I've already devoured the game as much as I possibly could in search of critical and related information I may have missed the first time around with no success, and I doubt a third go around would change my thoughts. Anyway, I think further context on the background and subsequent encounter with the main character needed more meat, so to speak, for lack of a better words, to create a dynamic that would immerse me further. Extra side quests regarding X Nation concerning their status, additional scenes, and heavier amounts of banter, especially during battles to alleviate some silence. There is some banter, though I think devs could have added a healthy amount to spare. Tease me with interconnected lore concerning their powers I wouldn't expect. Past entries in the series had parties where I can comfortably say I know their personality, likes and dislikes, habits, quirks, relationships with others, etc. And while this one individual didn't have that to that extent, I enjoyed their presence, actions, and the precious moments they had in the story. Granted, including my suggestions would inflate the base content more in hours, but I think it's a small price to pay to receive more fleshed out people. I'm not asking for 5 hours extra, although I wouldn't mind it, just an hour or two. Be that as it may, it doesn't diminish the game all that much. Wish we could control other party members, and while this doesn't make a lot of sense due to spoilers in the story, conceptually I think it could have worked to give further spice to the combat capabilities, adding a greater emphasis to my earlier point of fleshing out the characters, since some members' ability kit is not as varied as the main characters, which would perhaps make the players feel more lacking in the combat. However, internally I'm torn with the idea since I think this would have created somewhat a lesser emphasis on his story. And at its core, there is an extremely high plateau of which we, the audience, bear witness to his struggles, failures, and triumphs through his eyes. If we take out his eyesight and perspective, then these incredible experiences we see perhaps may not have had a greater impact. Balance is key here, and while I could sprout more suggestions, I could see why the developer chose not to do so. It's a troublesome matter I've long since debated whether more or less should be added for games. Style over substance is here. Should be noted, I don't perceive this notion in a negative light. I can see the merits, demerits with shades in the middle. For style, it is simply amazing to behold the icon fights, but it becomes rinse and repeat as we continue to reuse a repetitive formula, spamming our attacks amid downtimes of our cooldown abilities interspersed with quick time events to add a flourish, making battles memorable. Sure, there are moments when this evolves to keep the combat fresh amidst these epic David versus Goliath clashes. Tynan Sylvester goes deep into the subject of this in his article on style and substance in game design. Here he posits, the designs all become too similar to each other because they're all simulations of the same things. The style is decided upon and a simulation is built before the substance gets tweaked. This means that the fundamentals of the games are all the same, they are just variations on one another. We see this clearly with the icon fights and perhaps in some respects with the combat system in the non-icon battles. Nevertheless, it is fitting in a narrative sense due to how the plot and sequences are constructed. I think I would have preferred a more tactical aspect here. Instead of having mandatory engagements like these, include more natural surprises to the player, raising their eyebrows, make us fight using different aspects of an icon, outwitting my opponents using subterfuge and backstabbing. Let us use the environment to our advantage, add in human enemies to avoid clashes, and instill a sense of unpredictability by introducing our lovable party members into the equation. Give us choices, or perhaps go bolder where it's not even a fight but merely a duel of words. I could say more, but I'll withhold myself. I can't help but begrudgingly praise how well these iconic clashes were done in a cinematic sense, but also what they accomplish in the story. The substance is here too. Good lord, there are simply too many to my utter joy, and I've already said earlier regarding the world building, side quests, and how that wonderfully ties together into not just Clive's struggles but the cast alongside him. Final Fantasy XVI RPG elements are barely within, and while I think the commentary article does have some truth, I believe for the narrative this was sacrificed necessarily to focus entirely on his journey. I am not defending 16 by saying this, merely trying to infer based on what I've seen. There is a clear vision from which the devs have led from beginning, middle, and end for the player to see, and I, for one, applaud the move to risk in their grand vision by sacrificing some RPG elements, and as a result, I am given less time managing and micromanaging my unit stats and equipment. In favor of returning to action, is this a conscious effort by the team to do so? Perhaps. Should Final Fantasy have the bare minimum of RPG elements like tweaking stats, combat, and more to make it as Japanese role-playing games as other entries in the past have done? I don't know. I for one am no developer, nor am I an expert in determining the correct answer to such a question. I don't think there is even a perfect one out there from which we can all unanimously agree. Maybe Chrono Trigger? Without a pedantic fella hollering, well, actually. Comparisons will be made, of course, and in tradition we see these constant debates online. In my opinion, as long as the elements are satisfying to the player, then I think that system serves its purpose. I don't play Final Fantasy solely for the role-playing experience, although I don't mind if it's in-depth, like say Bravely Default or other Square Enix IPs. For me, I play Final Fantasy to become engrossed in the story, characters, music, themes, settings, gameplay, etc. And to this end, Creative Business Unit 3 delivers in chests full of mithril. The dungeons, these are places from which we can fight, could be improved level-wise to allow more freedom to explore. Why can't I search for a castle more thoroughly? Why am I stuck in yet another forced battle to clear out a room of enemies? And goodness, by the almighty grace of Gregor, please not another forced skirmish. As a consequence, a formulaic method rises as we go through the corridor and room to fight familiar enemies before we can progress. I don't think this is a bad design, I simply believe other avenues were available. Don't make some fights mandatory, allow us to free roam and inject some NPCs to raise an eyebrow, drop some lore papers around ruins so I have something else to do beyond fighting enemy mobs who think they have a chance of opposing me. Be bolder and go the distance by granting loads of enemies to clash with, akin to Dynasty Warriors, scores of deadly mobs to push me to the limit. If I were to play devil's advocate, I could see why the developers didn't do so, since 16 is already ambitious and the pace of how the story beats are granted is logical to me. Overall, I think aesthetically they're great, and the mini-bosses and regular boss fights are a thrill to test my mettle. The developers don't miss on constructing these encounters, using their MMO skills to bring in their expertise to a single-player game. Is a 200 IQ move. Final Fantasy mode seems to be the intended difficulty, unlocked after beating the story, featuring better tweaks by removing button prompts during QuickTime events and relying on visual cues to press, adding visual content in the form of upgraded weapons and accessories, increasing enemy strength and more enemies in areas you wouldn't expect in a first playthrough. I feel this mode ought to be available from the start, granting a balanced challenge to players looking for a bitter bout. But I think I understand why the developers didn't unlock it in the beginning. Some areas felt like padding by adding a mini-boss in areas when the base game didn't have one, which is an interesting choice. Alternatives I was thinking to alleviate this were adding 10 to 25% more enemy variety and injecting these instead of more mandatory fights. Nevertheless, I am a bit on the Final Fantasy mode, although it is a delightful affair for those who seek it. That's it for my mixed feelings. Despite the unholy amount I spouted, I don't believe they bring the entire product down a great deal. Think of these ultimately as food for thought. The rest are minor nitpicks not worth mentioning. Two last notes before I head out, and I am so sorry for talking more than I thought possible, but in the writing here, I savor every word. Very mature and filled with layers, deep with rich dialogue, considering it was spearheaded from creative director and lead writer Kazutoyo Mahiro, who was mentored by Yasumi Matsuno, who directed Final Fantasy Tactics, Vagrant Story, Final Fantasy XII, among others. Therefore, the writing is beautifully well crafted, not to the extent of flowery as the Shakespearean translation of Final Fantasy Tactics War of the Lions, but a cross between Vagrant Story and Final Fantasy XIV dialogue in a modern take. Resulting in naturally organic voice scenes, I frequently traveled back to cities, towns, and my main hub and listened to unique dialogue every time. No need to hit a button to converse either. Simply walk by and you can hear their chatter. The main story cutscenes between every important individual on screen are handled with care and delicateness. Villains too. This attention to detail is given the same treatment as we go through the side quests, and man, it is so worth it. Clear amounts of nuance here where you will see neither side winning or losing, but full of shades of grey in the dialogue, and how some quests are resolved in unexpected yet realistic outcomes. Clive's story from start to finish is such a breathtaking journey every Final Fantasy fan needs to experience. Wonderful development in my honest opinion, and I was deeply moved by how raw Ben Starr voices the main character, and how these give so much intensity to candid and countless natural conversations. Hell, even the voice actors aside from Ben deserve praise. A solid crew who tests, questions, and guides. Their counterparts, the villains, provide a powerful incentive to beat. Make no mistake, his story is not for the faint of heart. But as much as there is darkness here, so too is light. And it is without a doubt impeccably strong to behold. Cuteness and priceless moments are here to counter the stormy Valisthea political climate. Now, for my final score, I'm giving it a 9 out of 10. Final Fantasy has always been near and dear to my heart. I have witnessed innumerable stories that resonated so powerfully. Likeable to lovable casts, I reminisce from time to time. Soundtracks never failing to capture the spirit of fantasy. Gameplay that can be a hit, miss, or somewhere in between, and while some entries stagger and sputter without gas, each one has a special place in my heart. From the foundation in 1 to 3, ascending to greater heights than before from 4 to 6, and taking a more bold and experimental graphical change from 7 to 9, transitioning into an advanced engine from 10 to 13, and while I haven't played 12 yet, by the founder, trust me, I'll get there. 14 and 15 still kept my faith, and now for Final Fantasy 16 to grace our presence, I am left in awe at the immense weight of it all. The sheer depth at stake here when analyzed under a fine magnifying glass is a bloody tour de force. I applaud Square Enix's Creative Business Unit 3. Rarely do I become so absorbed in such a captivating narrative of Clive's story. Seeing his growth from his younger days as he ages is such a vital aspect to soak in. For those who still doubts the series, this is a title that is simply a must-play and cannot be missed. For any newcomer to JRPGs, I envy you greatly if you start with one of the finest Final Fantasy games I've had the pleasure of playing. Bravo! Yoshi P, Hiroshi Takai, Michael Christopher Koji Fox, Masayoshi Soken, Kazutoyo Mahiro, Mitsutoshi Gondai, Ryota Suzuki, Yusuke Hashimoto, Hiroshi Minegawa, Kazuya Takahashi, and so many more who helped develop this raw title. And most of all, thank you to anyone who watches and listens to this long review. You guys are the best. Anyway, that's enough from me. Take care, guys.